start the recording. Before we get into the content, I just wanted to start with some introductions. My name is Megan Horsch. I am an IU8 consultant on the Behavior Initiative and MTSS Academic. I am a school psychologist by training. I practiced about 20 years as a school psychologist and last summer made the transition to educational consultant at IU8. I will let Mark introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark DeRubis. I'm a behavior consultant at the IU8. I've been with the IU8 now about 7 years. My background is actually in mental health. I gravitate towards education by getting involved in a lot of behavior work with schools. And I guess here I am with the IU8 now helping out with this webinar.
Thanks, Mark. Some information about IU8. The mission of Appalachian Intermediate Unit 8 is to promote innovation and learning, and our purpose is to inspire people to exceed their dreams. A disclaimer about the information today. This information today is not meant to be legal advice. It is information for your professional use, to be used with your professional judgment within your systems under the guidance of your administration, your boards, and your solicitors. Like I mentioned previously, today we're going to focus really on social emotional learning and how we can use social emotional learning to support our students and to support ourselves. Really, over the course of the last couple weeks, been a little over a month now since a lot of schools in Pennsylvania were last in session and face-to-face. There's been a lot of work going on how to keep learning going, how to keep our schools going. A lot of that has been focused on the academic content, on how to get platforms up and running, and the what of it. And today we're going to take a little time and focus on not the content, but how to meet the behavioral needs, the emotional needs, and the social needs of our students. Will be the first part, and then the second part, we're going to talk about how to meet the social and emotional needs of ourselves, because we're also going through a large shift. Zoom or online professional development is new to some of us. It certainly is new to me and new to Mark. So we did want to start today with just some expectations. Our expectations today are going to revolve around three main areas: be responsible, be respectful, and be engaged. When we talk about being responsible, make yourself comfortable, take care of your needs. That's certainly the benefit of a virtual professional development. We're able to be comfortable in our own homes. So make yourself comfortable, take care of your own needs. Just return to the session quickly and quietly. Be respectful. What that will look like in today's webinar is to keep your microphone muted unless you're talking, so we don't hear a lot of background noise and people are able to hear content a little better. Make sure we're using respectful facial features. I know while one of the benefits is being comfortable in our own house, sometimes we forget we can be seen, and so just making sure we're using respectful facial features if your video's on. As far as being engaged in today's webinar, there's going to be two main ways to be engaged. During the first part of the presentation, use the chat feature to share your comments, ask questions. While I'm presenting, Mark will be following with the comments, as well as Julie Della, who is another IU8 consultant, is very knowledgeable about social emotional learning. So feel free to make comments and ask questions there. A lot of times we can address those in the chat. If not, we will address them at the end. At the end of the presentation today, we are going to have a question and answer session. And at that point, you can again ask questions in the chat box, or we can unmute your mic and you'll be able to ask questions verbally. So really those are the two main ways of participating and being engaged today. You can also feel free to take notes, but the slides will be available on Extended Campus when the video is posted later. So to get started with the content today, talking about behavioral, social, emotional needs, we're going to just talk with really one main behavioral principle. I call it the golden behavior rule. It's really the foundation for the most effective and efficiently run classrooms, and that is that educators must establish, teach, and reinforce their expectations, procedures, and routines. And I know there is a lot to unpack in that, just one sentence, up to 9 different combinations of verbs and predicates. But really, it is the foundation of all efficiently and effectively run classrooms, whether they're brick and mortar or whether it's virtual. Some of you might be familiar with Fred Jones's book, Tools for Teaching. In that book, he says, teachers with the best run classrooms spend most of the first 2 weeks teaching procedures and routines. Do it right or do it all year. And really, when we think about starting a new school year, that's what we spend the first couple weeks doing. We teach kids how to enter our classrooms, have a seat, get started on the bell ringer. We can teach them to come in, turn in your homework, have a seat, and wait quietly until I begin class. We teach them how to enter the classroom. We teach them how to ask questions and participate. Some of us teach students that they need to raise their hand, wait to be called on. Some of us might teach them that we appreciate a discussion kind of format, and so that they can make comments without raising their hands. But really, when we start our classrooms those first couple weeks, we are teaching routines, procedures, and expectations. Home-based learning is really no different in this respect. And it's something we really need to start to explicitly look at and be conscious about teaching. I know the first couple weeks, like I mentioned earlier, we were all busy working on trying to figure out how we were going to get our content out, how to get platforms up, how to address different things. But now's the time to really be thinking about what are our expectations for our kids. They may not be the same as they were 2 months ago. What are our procedures and routines? We need to really start to establish those, teach them, and reinforce them. It also helps students prepare themselves for success. This is new to a lot of students. And so they come into the situation not knowing what the expectations are. And so by allowing them to be taught the expectations and reinforced, we are allowing them to be set up for success. A couple behavioral resources, and you'll see throughout the presentation, I have a couple slides with resources on. Since the slides will be available, I just wanted to make sure you had additional resources to consult. When you're talking about behavioral resources, some excellent resources are the CI3T website and pbis.org. Both of them have resources on how to explicitly teach expectations and routines and procedures, how to reinforce them. The other resource I gave you there was PBIS Rewards. I know as we switch to distance learning, a lot of us are struggling with how do we reward students? What are some incentives we can use? PBIS Rewards has an excellent blog there as far as what incentives work for distance learning. But really, these 3 behavioral resources you can use to help start to establish, teach, and reinforce your expectations, behaviors, and routines. Once you have those expectations and procedures and routines set up, social emotional learning really layers well on top of that and goes well with it. Today, we just have an hour, so the first part, I'm going to talk about 3 areas of social emotional learning. First, I'm going to talk about addressing the elephants in the room. I'm going to talk about maintaining relationships. I'm going to talk about promoting social emotional learning through activities. When I talk about addressing the elephants in the room, really what comes to my mind are 2 main areas. One, that everybody is learning through this process, and 2 is talking about the closure and the pandemic. And so when we look at the fact that everybody's learning, I want us to really think about embracing the fact that this is a learning opportunity for us as well as for our students. As professionals, we're used to purposely designing our classrooms, our environments, so they're set up in a way that we know the answers, we know what the expectations are. However, we're put in a situation now with some of the closures that we might be uncomfortable. Certainly, I feel like I'm outside my comfort zone multiple times a day. But if you look at it through a different lens, it's really an opportunity for us to show our students that learning really does never stop, that we can be resilient, and that even if we don't know the answers, knowing where to look for the answers is just as important. And so instead of shying away from the fact that we may not know things or this might be a learning experience for us, truly embracing that, being a role model for our students, letting them see how we can adapt to change, how we can admit if we don't know the answer, how we can rely on others, is really a learning opportunity for us and our students. And so really embrace that first elephant in the room, and the fact that we are learning right along with our students. The other thing some educators feel uneasy about addressing is talking about closures in the pandemic. And I just wanted to provide you some tips if you're talking to students about that. First and foremost, be honest and accurate. You don't need to offer unnecessary details, but make sure your information is accurate and be honest with them about the situation. You do want to correct misinformation. Sometimes kids hear parts of what's being said or hear it from third or fourth sources and they get their information mixed up. So you want to make sure in keeping your information accurate, that you're correcting any information that they're sharing. When you're talking to kids, you also want to make sure you're keeping it simple and age appropriate. Keeping answers and explanations succinct, to the point, and simple helps them to digest it, helps them to feel more safe. Also keeping it age appropriate. Obviously, if you're working with kindergartners or first graders, the information you're going to share is going to be different than if you are working with high school students. So making sure you're keeping that information age appropriate. Also, you want to make sure you're acknowledging feelings. It is okay to be anxious. It's okay to be fearful. Those are very valid feelings that we all might be feeling. So you don't want to dismiss them, but you do want to focus on the safety measures that are being put into place to help with those feelings. So it's okay to be anxious, but also know that schools are closed to try to flatten the curve or slow the spread, that we're practicing social distancing. You can review safety measures at home, washing hands, those kind of things. So it's important to acknowledge feelings so that kids know that there's someone hearing them, but also to focus on the safety measures. And then finally, when you're talking to students, make sure you're aware of their cues. When you're discussing the closures or the pandemic, be aware of how your kids are responding. Again, you want to acknowledge those responses, but you also want to be aware when they're kind of ready to move on to a different subject, or if the information is becoming overwhelming for them, and be able to move to a different subject. Also, globally speaking, kids react to stressful situations differently. We're in a unique situation because we've had several months to develop relationships with our students and know what is typical behavior for them. And so when you're looking for cues from your students, you also want to look to see if they're behaving in a way that was somehow different than they behaved before. So if you have a student who has been very talkative all year and has become quiet since the closures, or just the opposite, if you have a student that's been quiet all year and has become very talkative since the closures, you want to try to reach out to that student and make some connections there. So again, just being aware of what is not characteristic for your individual students. Some resources as far as talking to students. I have two there. Castle is an excellent resource. They have a resource about talking to students during the COVID-19 closures. And they have additional social-emotional learning resources there. Also, the National Association of School Psychologists has a good resource about talking to children. It's a parent resource, so you can provide it to your families, but it's also good information for educators as well. So as we move into this new way of distance learning or at-home learning or virtual learning, however your school has chose to move forward, one thing we really need to keep in mind is that relationships still matter. Relationships help to establish a sense of connectedness. It helps us to understand that someone understands us and supports us. And now with the social distancing, this sense of connectedness is even more important. And not only is it a relationship between us as educators and our students, but the relationships between students themselves become even more important during this time. So how do we go about doing this? One way to continue to maintain relationships and connections is planning activities that allow students to see, hear, and interact with you. I know as educators, we can sometimes be apprehensive here as far as making videos, reaching out on video conferencing, but it's so important that your students can see you, hear you, and interact with you during this time. Again, it promotes that sense of connectedness, that sense of safety. Some teachers and educators are overwhelmed with maybe having their whole class in a Zoom meeting or conference. And so if that's overwhelming to you, you can do smaller groups. Certainly in a brick and mortar school, teachers in the classroom will rotate between groups of students. They'll go to table A and meet with 4 or 5 students. They'll go to table B. And you can certainly continue to do that virtually. Have a meeting with just 3 or 4 of your kids if the whole classroom might overwhelm you. But really, again, to promote that connectedness, planning those activities where you can see, hear, and interact with your students is so important during this time. Not only is it important that they see, hear, and interact with us as educators, it's equally as important that they see, hear, and interact with each other and maintain that connectedness with one another. So when you hold group meetings, whether it's a small group or a large group, try to allow time for students to connect with each other. You know, you might want to build expectations around what keeping topics school appropriate, time limitations, things like that. But you want to make sure you're really allowing them time to visually see, hear, and interact with each other as well as you. Also, when you're looking at maintaining relationships, trying to find time to connect with students individually. And I realize this one can be hard, especially if you're a secondary teacher and you might see hundreds of kids a day. You don't have to individually connect with every student every day. It might be weekly or every other week that you connect with a student. But trying to connect with them on that individual level is also important. If you can't connect with every student, try to pick those students who you think might need some additional support during this time and focus on trying to connect with them. And you can do it in a video conference, a phone call, chat feature, individual personalized emails. Any way you can find to really connect with an individual student is also important in maintaining those relationships. Finally, allowing for activities that focus on relationships and social emotional learning. Like I said earlier, I know we have all been busy working on how to get academic content out to our students, how to get technology out to our students, how to find a process to continue the education. But it's okay to allow some activities to focus solely on making that connection, building those relationships, those social emotional learning needs. I'm not saying that the academic content isn't important, but what I am saying is relationships and social emotional learning during this time is equally as important, and to allow some activities that focus on those. So some resources as far as maintaining relationships. There's an article on tolerance.org, trauma-informed approach to teaching, that is excellent. Makes some very good practical points about classrooms, shutdowns. And then Edutopia has an excellent article on maintaining relationships during the school closures. So the next part, I'm going to talk a little bit about activities you can do in your classroom. I'm going to give you some specific activities, but I also want to use the next couple slides to kind of generate your own creativity. So what I'd like you to do is use the chat box as we go through some of these slides and share how you might use these activities in your classroom, or how you might tweak stuff, or how you might use it moving forward. And I'll show you a little bit more about what I mean here. When we talk about how to structure classrooms to promote social emotional learning, one of the things that is a key feature of social emotional learning is predictability. It promotes a sense of safety, it supports regulation, self-awareness, and self-management. Not only is it social emotional learning, but it's also trauma-informed practices. And when we think about it, really our brains crave routine and predictability. Think about how you get ready for work in the morning. A lot of us do the same thing in the same order every morning. Part of that is because our brains crave that routine and predictability. And students are the same way. And so how do we produce that predictability in our classroom? One way to do that is to reintroduce simple and familiar routines that our class had before the closure. So one example might be if you had a read aloud when you came in from lunch, when you came back from lunch. That is an easy, simple, familiar routine you can introduce in the virtual setting. Whether it's a Zoom meeting, read aloud, or whether it's a video of you reading aloud, reintroducing those simple, familiar routines to your students can help with that predictability. If you have a routine you're thinking about in your classroom right now, feel free to share it in the chat. Again, it helps everyone tuned in to generate some ideas as well. So if there's a simple, familiar routine, you can reintroduce those. But if you don't have something that's easily transferable, feel free to establish new routines. Again, these routines don't have to be daily. It can be a routine you do weekly. Friday morning funnies, everybody tells a joke or something along those lines. But the routines and the predictability help to establish that sense of safety, allows for more self-regulation. And so anytime you can work in predictability and routine is excellent. Another choice and flexibility is another social emotional learning aspect of the classroom. It is also a trauma-informed practice. Choice helps to promote empowerment in a time when students feel a lot of things are out of their control or choices have been made for them. Giving them a choice in your classroom helps to promote that empowerment. Flexibility helps to promote self-management in the form of self-discipline, goal setting, organizational skills. Additionally, choice and flexibility helps students know you understand there may be limitations or other circumstances going on in their household. They might be helping with siblings. They might be sharing devices with siblings or parents. They might have limited resources, paper, pencils, crayons, things that they might get at school that they don't have access to at home. So by providing choice and flexibility, you're really demonstrating to them that you understand that there may be limits or other circumstances. As far as choices and flexibility, that can be related to activities, timelines, or means of communication. One such activity is something my son gets, which is a spelling bingo. He has a bingo card laid out with 9 different ways to practice spelling. He has to practice 4 of them through the week, but it's his choice what 4 of those 9 he wants to practice. An excellent way to provide choice and give that empowerment back to students. If you guys have activities in your classrooms that you're able to provide choices like that, feel free to share in the comments. The other thing is I want to highlight is flexibility with timelines. Again, students are at home, might be sharing devices, might be having other obligations. And so it's important that we're flexible with our timelines and our due dates when we can be. So assigning something on Monday and having it due Tuesday may be difficult for a student whose mother works in the ER Mondays for a 12-hour shift and he has to take care of his siblings. And so making those timelines flexible is really social emotional learning. And being proactive and letting your students know that you're going to be flexible so that they don't feel anxious and that you'll work with them to get things done. Another activity is a check-in. It helps to promote social awareness, connectedness, and relationships. This can be as simple as on Seesaw, sending out a feelings chart. So a lot of elementary school teachers have those hangings in their rooms. Sending out a feelings chart, have them circle something and send it back to you. Or have them send an emoji or a gift telling you how they're feeling today. Another way to do a check-in is through surveys, and I have one just to share with you. Google Forms, you can create a quick virtual check-in that you can send out to your students. And so here's an example of one. You have the student record their name. Today I feel happy, sad. You can write words or you can use emojis or videos. Tell me why you feel that way. And really after that, you can add additional questions as you see fit. So something I'm looking forward to today, one goal I have for today. I would like someone to reach out to me and let me know and touch base with me. How's digital learning going? And really you can customize this not only to help promote that self-awareness, check in on feelings, but also see how they're learning, help them setting goals, see how we can help them. If you have a question you think might be good, feel free to share it in the chat to add to a survey. But really when we do check-ins, we want to make sure we're focusing on how we can help students. And so saying that just like that is okay. How can I help you? To get some feedback there. Another excellent social emotional learning activity that can be easily transferred to a virtual setting is a kindness wall or a compliment wall. It helps promote social awareness, self-awareness, and relationship skills. I've seen these throughout different schools. I've seen papers where on the bottom you can pull off little compliments. I've seen buildings that have positive sayings on the walls and mirrors and stuff like that. This social emotional learning activity is easily transferred to an online or virtual setting. You can set up a board and yourself put positive sayings and compliments. You can keep it global or make it specific. So you can generate a board and have positive sayings and encourage people, your students, to check in when they need to pick me up, or you can have them add sayings when they have something positive to add. You could also make it specific. So you could make it specific to a period or a class that you're having, or you can make it specific to a person. So if I wanted to maybe do a compliment board for Mark, and I could say, students, I'd like you to submit a compliment or a positive saying to me Monday and Tuesday for Mark, and then I could present it to Mark. And then Wednesday and Thursday, I want everybody to submit to me positive sayings or compliments for Megan, acts of kindness, and then Friday, I'm gonna present it to Megan. And again, keeping it global or specific depends on what kind of setup you have and specifically your students, but both good ideas. Another great social emotional learning activity is gratefulness activities. It promotes self-awareness and social awareness. These activities can be simple or complex, so you can have students just go out and take pictures of things they're grateful for, or you can have them write a sentence or a paragraph. Again, keeping in mind that this is just an activity to promote gratefulness and not necessarily content, grammar, that kind of stuff. But they can be simple to complex. They can be specific or general. So a gratefulness activity where you just have them say anything they're grateful for, or something specific like, tell me something you're grateful for that's pink, or tell me something that you're grateful for that's smaller than you. Sometimes getting a little bit more specific helps kids focus better on it and get a little bit more creative. Another thing you can do with gratefulness activities is they can be individualized or group. And so you can have each student individually submit what they're grateful for, or you can make it a group activity. So you can have your class submit things that are that they're grateful for, and see if you get 50 things as a class total as opposed to individually. And sometimes shifting from individual to group helps to take pressure off individual students who might be struggling with finding things. I just have an example of that for you here. I had my own family go around the other day and find yellow things we were grateful for. And you can see it's just on a form of a Padlet. They were all able to post things. Some of my son's happy for his terrible towel. I'm happy for my favorite bag. But we were all able to, you can guess who's happy for the snacks. But we were all able to go around and find things that were yellow that we were grateful for. So sometimes making things specific helps to generate some of that creativity. Those gratefulness activities, again, are a good way to promote social emotional learning. And then just the last thing I want to touch on before I turn it over to Mark is I wanted to highlight activities as opposed to traditional explicit lessons, because I think as educators, we're all pretty familiar with explicit lessons. There are lots of resources out there that have the traditional explicit lessons on social emotional learning. This is the objective, these are the activities, this is how you see if it's done. IU8 runs a good one, it's Connects You, that has lessons available. I know there are a lot more out there, which is also a great way to promote social emotional learning. You want to do activities and explicit lessons and kind of pair them together. Both of those are good, but today I just focused on activities because we had a limited amount of time. And so as far as addressing social emotional learning in the classroom, one of the focuses is on students, but the other focus is on addressing social and emotional needs within ourselves. This is a trying time for us as well. And so I'm going to go ahead, and Mark's going to give us some resources and talk to us a little bit about that. Mark, are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I will say this is adjustment. I got 4 adults living in the house with 2 kids and a wife. We're all working home. I think there's a lot of demands on the internet, so hopefully this goes off without a hitch. As far as technology goes, I know when Megan was talking, some of my audio got a little sketchy and such. So please, hopefully somebody can tell me if my connection's not very good. Okay, so what I'd like to do is talk briefly about emotional well-being, and do so, I guess one of the, side goals would be maybe some of this information that you could also use with your kids as well as yourself. My goal is really to give self-care a purpose in some type of direction and explain the rationale behind why it's important. Okay. Okay, so the first question then, if we had time, this would be a good reflection question, is what is different about COVID-19 than other natural disasters here? And for sake of time, the big difference is that we're all affected by this, and we're all going through COVID, this natural disaster. Which is somewhat different. Usually when natural disasters they happen to somebody else, or they happen in a different location, and it's easy for us to compartmentalize that emotion because we're not impacted the same way. So when we're working years ago, when I had colleagues that were working with some of the the victims that were displaced in the families of Katrina, it was a little bit easier for them to deal with them and listen to them and keep their emotions in check as they were listening to the hardships of the family. Which leads us into why we're doing self-care. And that really is we want to be not only our best for ourselves, but best for others. And when we're at our best, we're able to meet the needs, because it's often said that who we need to be is who the students need us to be, who I guess our clients need to be if we're in the counseling field. And we know if we're depressed, we do best when we're around vibrant and energetic people. If we're anxious, around calm people, and it's no different. No different with the students we work with. And through my experience as a counselor and working in the field doing supervision, you realize it's hard to give people something that we don't have ourselves. And so we really need to take care of ourselves and make sure we're refueling us as the emotional refueler. And just as a reminder here, we've all probably heard this before, the saying, put your oxygen mask on first. I believe this comes from a flight terms that if there's turbulence or something would happen, we would be put in a situation where we'd have to put our masks on. We would tend to be inclined to put the mask on maybe an elderly person or a child first, but then we'd be at risk for passing out. So we'd want to make sure we're best to helping others when we help ourselves first. Now, one of the things is that how self-care starts with is self-awareness here. When we have healthy well-being, we have a better understanding of ourselves, how we're impacted others, our strengths and weaknesses, fears and concerns, peers, and our pet peeves. A lot of times, this probably warrants a whole discussion in itself. And here it's condensed to one slide. This is hard to do, to be open and honest with ourselves about our strengths and weaknesses in a way that we don't over magnify our strengths and weaknesses, which tends to be we try to strive to be objectives with ourselves. And when we know this, we're more apt to be a better person and make those corrections in the moment or in the fly. When you think about this, if has someone ever told you something that you did, maybe it was a behavior or even a saying. I remember a couple years ago, someone saying I said the word per se a lot, and I didn't believe them. And then I caught myself saying it a whole bunch after they pointed it out to me. It's the same way. Once something becomes self-aware, you're more apt to make corrections. Talk a little bit about anxiety and stress. Now, here there's a lot. Anxiety and stress, this is pretty much at the forefront of discussions a lot now, but even before the pandemic, this was a big topic. So I just want to stress that a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of stress is actually not a bad thing. We need a little bit of stress to help motivate us, a little bit of anxiety to help us study. It helps keep us safe. If, one of the little jokes is if a friend takes us to a party and we notice that they're stumbling and slurring their words, we get anxious about that and call Uber. That's good anxiousness to have. It helps keeps us safe. But the one thing to understand is that stress, it permeates and it can channel through a system. For lack of better words, it's very contagious. And think in terms of this, if you ever been in a situation with your family, or you've seen this, maybe somebody can't find their soccer shoes or their soccer pads, or you lost your keys, and the whole family is searching for that, and they're all kind of stressed to help the common goal. That is a way of happening. And usually when you meet somebody like a student who's anxious and you're working with the family, there's more than one family member who's anxious. And this could happen throughout a whole system. And when you look at what's going on at a national, federal level, even just let's look at education, try to think about how much stress that system is enduring from the state level, trying to find ways to educate children and change completely how we do things on the fly, and how that's probably channeled down through superintendents, to principals, to teachers, and on the way down. So the best thing that we can do is really try to recognize it and limit the contagion effect and keep ourselves healthy, and employ our coping skills, which might be breathing, reading, exercising, all those types of things. We just don't want to pass the stress on to others. So we do checkpoints. How much stress is placed on me? How much of this is exaggerated? Sometimes it can be manufactured. Our wants become stresses. I remember working with somebody in the counseling field. It was a mother, and she was really stressed out. And when you listen to a lot of her stressors, they were things that didn't really need to be done right away, or things that even if they weren't done weren't that important. Like getting out right away and getting somebody a card because her friend just had a baby, which that could have waited. So think in terms of that, how much pressure you are putting on yourselves. But the other stuff is some checkpoints. Is remember to control the things that we control and what's in your control. Chances are you've done this before. You've done a circle of control, and if you haven't seen that, it's pretty simple. You could probably Google it, but you would draw a circle, and you just think in terms of what are the things in your circle of control, and usually their attitude, how you approach your responses, versus the things that are out of your control. And we find that when we're focusing on the things that we can control, our lives become more manageable. And as I was saying, is if you feel like your stress and anxiety is impacting others, and you are doing a stress lateral, so to speak, it's really a good time to kind of take reflection and use some type of intervention to try to limit that. So Megan already talked about this. So this is kind of echoing where she was at. And that is making sure that we're taking care of ourselves by developing a routine in this new normal and having a work-life balance that really works for your family and for yourself and your employer. Remember that really our goal is to achieve some type of predictability that will relax the mind. When things are unpredictable, it makes us uneasy. We don't like ambiguity, we don't like uncertainty, and routine helps us that. I think in terms of if you're in a haunted house, you have that feeling of something's always going to jump out at you. When you're in your routine, that feeling is somewhat alleviated. Rituals. Rituals are a great opportunity to implant positive memories. I think about some of the hardships that I went to, and some of the rituals that were established in those hardships become very meaningful, and you look back in fondness, whether it's hanging out at a particular store after some grueling sporting practices, or if you're going back to your hometown or college and visiting a tavern that you used to go to every Thursday night. It brings back a positive memory, and it certainly helps to go through some hardships that we do. And it is very important for building and solidifying interpersonal connections to establish those rituals, not just with yourself, but intra and interpersonal type of rituals. I'd like to emphasize too the importance of making connections, and with our students, but with people in our lives. We are social beings that need interactions to thrive, and making these connections feel like they matter. And the thing about giving to others and reaching out, when there's a feeling of appreciation, reciprocation, we feel like we matter in turn. So it's a win-win situation there as far as connecting and reaching out. Megan talked about this, so this is a nice addition, is really the act of practicing gratitude is a great way of reaching out and how much that means. If you ever gotten a letter yourself or a note from a former student about how much they appreciated you, I would have a hard time believing you if you say you weren't touched by that. That's always nice to hear, to do that. This is a great time to really catch up on that and reach out to people that you normally wouldn't reach out to. Oops, I think skipped over one. Okay, so that said, the connections are important. I think we want to be mindful that we live in a day and age where texting and emailing and other forms of communication seem to have overtaken normal modes of communication, of getting together, and naturally we can't get together. But we want to try to make time to do as much face-to-face and voice-to-voice as possible. When you think of the times that let's say, all the good laughs you've had in your life, or you think about the majority of those times, a lot of those times were spent with other people were present, or maybe somebody was present that wasn't laughing, and you found that feedback funny and made you laugh even more. But usually if someone was present, or if you had a good laugh, somewhere in the near future called another person to share that moment with. We need that feedback. There's a reason why they say 80 to 90% of communication is nonverbal, and that certainly helps us. So please make sure that you're finding time to reach out to family, friends, and colleagues, and for that personal connections. Being active is important. Research has shown that when people are physically and mentally active, they're mobile, they can get around, they exercise their mind, I guess, and body, that they're more successful in dealing with stressors that come up from time to time. The thing about hardship is when it hits a stagnant target, it tends to be much more impactful than when it hits somebody who is very active, that's a moving target. That moving target tends to stay in motion and move through the hardship a lot better than someone who would be stagnant. Remember that stagnation and immobility can lead to boredom, depression, very negative output. And if you feel like you're at loss of control, hopelessness sets in. So it's best to keep in motion there, and just waiting around is not very counterproductive to being emotionally healthy person. And I think this is just a nice point to add that, please, with the news and social media, it's probably best to watch how much we take in, and not a lot of good news, and some of that plays at our fears and our anxieties, and that could lead to emotional numbing and anxiety. So do your best to try to limit that, and try to get your news from reputable sources such as the government reports and the governor's report. Some positive habits here. And now the thing about this, I'm not going to go through all these, and this list is not inclusive here. But I would like to make a point that the thing about positive habits is they need to be practiced every day, and they tend to be best when they're done preventative. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't be done in intervention. Oftentimes they are. There's some type of crisis moment that we start making life types of changes. But think of it in terms of an investment that you do. Let's say you exercise. It's suddenly you're not going to be in shape and a lot better in a week. That's like investing $100. A week later, you're going to have $100 and maybe 1 cent. It works best over time if you keep making that investment. Some of the bigger ones here that I think are very applicable to now is making sure we're keeping our thinking and our thought as optimistic as possible. And I think in terms of that, we don't want to have a delusional denied reality, such as thinking a positive mindset that COVID-19 is not going to affect us, so we're going to go out and ignore social distancing, and that would be some type of denial. But we want to have a growth mindset with the thoughts that this will make it better for us, and that we'll get through it, that we have enough strength, encouraging, and at the end, our society and ourselves will be better. I'd like to focus just a moment on sleep. I think that this sleep probably warrants a lot more than just a second or two. But sleep is so crucial for rejuvenating our body. And I know when I used to do private counseling, if I could just pick one thing that wasn't clinically related that would pay the biggest dividend, it was sleep, is getting people sleep regimented. When sleep is regimented and people are getting quality sleep, the 7 to 8 hours that they need, they are just less likely to be impacted by anxiety. They're less riddled with emotionals, things that irritate you. Suddenly you can think things a little bit through rationally before responding. And the last thing I'll just focus on is the breaks and boundaries, to make sure that we're taking those as we're developing a new system, a new contract, I guess, if you will, with our work and our personal lives, is that can all bleed together. And sometimes that can add us stressful, and it's to really take breaks and create boundaries. And we tend to think of breaks just in terms of work related, but think in terms of that could be personal. If there's something preoccupying us emotionally on our mind, we need to really learn to take a break, from that, well, even if that happens in our personal life. Here's a nice little resource that I have, just because it encompasses with a lot of some of the stuff that we talked about today, of the self-care. This is from the website actionforhappiness.org. Feel free to go. There's a lot of other different types of videos and downloadable things that you could have. But I like this because this is kind of aesthetic to the eye, and it also is just kind of a way of implementing some of the stuff that we talked about today. Some resources that I'm not going to go over all of these. A lot of them, I already went for the action of happiness. Some of these just kind of verify and resources that kind of are additional to supplement what I talked about, what Megan talked about. I'd like to point out to the top, the Calm website, calm.com. It does have some meditations that are very specific to certain situations. It also has some videos and guidance and how-to stuff. I found that beneficial. Okay, finally, just go over one quick thing, and that is if you do find like your mood or behaviors are impacting your life roles in some way, hard to take care of yourself, others, or do your job, and you're experiencing depression, whether it's anxiety, mood, irritability, and you know, there's no really harm of seeking help here. That doesn't really imply a weakness of your part. It certainly helps to go to somebody and have them listen to you in a supportive, you know, and mirror back to you so you can make better decisions, or not better, but help you make decisions in your life there. So if you feel like you need to take advantage of that, please do. How you would go about doing that is basically looking at your private insurance, your employer's AE-pay services, if you have insurances. Self-referrals, you can certainly call a clinician and they can let you know if they're on your insurance or not. And also think in terms of the county behavioral health services. If you would call there, likely they're going to give you a number or two. You might have to make an additional phone call as well, but these are places to start. And in case you didn't know, the government, or the Department of Health and Services in the state of Pennsylvania has released or started a referral helpline for those impacted by COVID. And so the number is 1-855-284-2494. So if that is a resource to you, please feel free to use it. And lastly is just some other beneficial numbers that will be in the resources for handouts. That is all. I will open it up myself to Megan for questions, if there are any.
Again, you can type any questions in the chat box or unmute yourself, but I do want to stress the fact that really taking time for social emotional connections and addressing those needs now is important. And I saw in the comments using the term physical distancing as opposed to socially distancing. I agree that I think that's a much better term. But kind of taking time to focus on the social emotional needs of ourselves and our students are important as well. So if there aren't any questions, like we mentioned before, the video is going to be available on Extended Campus, and the slides with the resources will also be available. Mark and I will stay on here for a couple more minutes if anybody has any questions or wants to continue talking. But if not, you guys can feel free to log off. But if you want to stay on and ask questions, you can do that as well. Thank you very much for joining us today.